Hello and welcome in, everybody. I'm Andromeda Astria, and today we're going to go over how to find your Myers Briggs type. The first and most important thing we're going to look at is being honest with yourself. It is extremely important that when you're trying to find your Myers Briggs type that you're really honest about who you are and how you process information. You do not want to be aspirational in this. You don't want to be looking at how you would like to be or how you wish you were. What we're looking for here is consistency. How have you been most of your life? What are the trends you've seen? How have you gathered information? What has been really normal and really common for you? It's important that we look at how you have always been and not at how you would like to be. Now, with that in mind, one of the first things that I suggest to people when starting on their Myers Briggs journey is that they go take a bunch of tests. While one test is not going to be the answer to finding your type because they are all biased in one way or another, taking a whole bunch of them and comparing your answers and looking for consistency can help you narrow down your type options a lot. What you want to do here is you want to look for, do all of them say that you're a feeler type? Do all of them say you're a sensor type? What thing is consistent across all the tests you've taken? It'll help you narrow it down. You might be able to narrow it down to half the types. Say everything agreed on feeler, but everything else was kind of all over the place. Well, now you can largely exclude the thinking types because if every test is agreeing that you are a feeler type, it is quite likely you will end up being a feeler type. Now, we do want to make sure that we're taking a healthy combination of both Myers Briggs tests and Myers Briggs function tests, so you both have the letter tests as well as the TE, TI, FE, FI, all of those. Combine them together, and you're going to start getting a decent picture of the things that you are strong in and the things that you're weak in. After you've taken all those tests, you are likely able to narrow it down a little. At the very least, you'll hopefully have narrowed it down to 8 of the 16 choices. If you're very lucky, you may have narrowed it down to 1 or 2 choices, but wherever you're at, what you want to do is you want to now read about each of those types. You want to make sure you're checking multiple sources for this. And another great place to look is a lot of people will type fictional characters, and it can help a lot to go look at these fictional characters and see if you have anything in common with those characters. Now, once you've narrowed it down a little bit, it's time to start studying the functions. I do leave this until a little bit later because I think it is important for everyone to get to know Myers Briggs a little bit better through fun means like tests and looking at fictional characters and pop culture things before you really dive into the meat that is the functions. The first thing you want to look into when you start researching the functions is just plain and simple how each of them works. So at its core, what is extroverted feeling? Once you have a decent understanding of how each of these functions works, you want to move on to seeing how they change based on which position they're in. And this is what we talked about in our functions video, where there is a primary position. So there's first, there's secondary, there's tertiary, and then there's inferior. So your primary function is the one that you are the most comfortable with, and it is the one that is going to look the most like what they describe when they're describing these functions. This is why it can be a little bit more difficult to figure out all your functions other than your primary function, or essentially your primary extroverted function, which could be your primary function or your secondary function. Because when they're describing these, they're really looking at a strong version of this function. The further down the list it goes, the weaker it becomes, all the way to inferior functions, which are very, very different from the described function you get. So it is important where it shows up in your function stack, and it is going to be very different. So you really want to look at function stacks and see how each of these shows up depending on where it is. The next thing you want to look at is how they work together, because remember, these come in pairs, so extroverted feeling is always paired with introverted thinking. And there are some really interesting mistakes that can happen in typing because different pairs work differently together. So a lot of times people will think that they have introverted thinking when what they're really looking at is how extroverted thinking and introverted intuition work together. Because there are similarities, and this is where it's really important to end up understanding all your functions because you'll be able to differentiate between an introverted thinker or an extroverted thinker who also uses introverted intuition. That is all I have for you today. Now it's time for you to go out there, take a bunch of tests, do some research, and figure out what your type is. And if you do, I would love it if you drop it in the comments because I'd love to know what your type is. Have a lovely rest of the day. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.